My parents were searching for a vacation property. Instead of purchasing a Hamptons waterfront home, they chose to purchase a haunted 18th century farmhouse in upstate New York. The farmhouse is on 100 acres of land and has 7 bedrooms. There is also a tenant house that is split into 2 parts so that male and female servants could live separately, along with several other small buildings on the property. And there was a small 1-room schoolhouse built many years ago. It had a little dome on top called a cupola, and inside that cupola hung a big bell that used to ring when it was time for class. Not far from the schoolhouse there was a huge barn made of old wood. The barn was so large that it had beautiful mahogany stalls for the horses. Each stall shone nicely when the sunlight hit it. We were told that long ago during the French and Indian War, fierce battles were fought on this land. In another part of its history, the property even served as a stagecoach, and travelers on long journeys would stop there to rest, share meals, and tell stories of far-off places. The house itself had a very heavy and gloomy feeling. It was as if the old spirits and memories of past events were still there, watching every move. You constantly felt like someone or something was looking at you from the dark corners. On a lovely summer day, I was alone in the living room watching TV. My mom and siblings had gone shopping, so I was watching I Love Lucy on one of the few TV channels available when I suddenly felt a heavy, uneasy feeling as if someone was watching me. Years later, I discovered that my brother had gone through the same thing and had reacted similarly. The first strange and inexplicable event occurred in my bedroom, which had 2 twin beds. My mom and I were the only ones home that weekend, and she was sleeping in the other bed when I woke up at dawn to the sound of sheets shifting on her bed. The sound was strong and constant, filling the silent room with a constant rustling. You have to realize that this house was so large that even if something as loud as a bomb went off in the kitchen, I probably wouldn't have heard it from my room. I lay there for a moment, feeling scared and confused, trying to figure out what was making that sound. I slowly rolled over to see what was happening, and there was no one in the bed. In the beginning, I thought maybe my mom was making my brother's bed in his room, which shared a wall with mine, but she wasn't there at all. She was in the kitchen. My mother, who never believed in ghosts, once chose to sleep in my bedroom when she was alone at home. In the middle of the night, she felt a heavy object settle on the corner of her bed and push on the mattress. When she looked closely, she noticed that the mattress was pushed down as if someone had actually sat there. She was shocked and perplexed by the experience, as the room was completely silent save for the sound of her own rapid breathing and the gentle rustle of the bed linens. At first, she thought she might be dreaming or that her mind was playing tricks on her. We lived in this house for many years, and a lot of weird things happened there. There was also a haunted restaurant in town called the Bull's Head Inn, but we didn't go there much because it was very pricey, and I never saw anything weird happen there myself. However, there are rumors that the bar was constructed in an old woman's bedroom, and that she was a part of the temperance movement, which meant she disapproved of drinking alcohol. According to the story, she would throw cocktail napkins around, and some even broke glasses. When I was growing up, I lived in a small farmhouse on 2 acres of land. Our home was not a busy farm, but many different animals came to stay with us over the years. We had cats, dogs, chickens, rabbits, and even a few farm animals that visited. My mother was a kind veterinarian who spent much of her free time helping animals. She cared for sick, hurt, or mistreated animals and found them new homes where they could be safe and loved. Our home was quiet and peaceful with birds singing and wildlife all around. reminding us that we were not in a city. There was also a walking trail in the woods behind our house, and during the warmer months tourists, hikers, and campers often used the trail. Now I loved reading books and spent a lot of time in our barn. The barn was located at the back of our property along the fence, and I spent many hours there taking care of the animals and reading all my books, so sometimes I could hear people talking and laughing as they walked along the trail. When I was 10 years old, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom finished work. I was a responsible kid, so my mom trusted me to catch the bus and start on my chores without any help. That day, as usual, I hopped off the school bus, opened the front gate by myself, and walked up the dirt driveway toward our house. When I stepped inside, I went straight to the kitchen where I made myself an after-school snack. I prepared a good old-fashioned peanut butter and jelly sandwich and poured a cold glass of milk. Then I took my snack and went out the back door, heading toward the barn. I knew my afternoon routine very well. Usually our dogs would run up to greet me, barking and circling around my legs with their tails wagging happily, but today I didn't see them anywhere. I called for them, but they didn't come. Instead, I heard soft, muffled barking coming from the barn. That was very strange, because we never locked the dogs in the barn. During the day they stayed outside, and at night they slept with us inside the house. I placed my snack on an old rough tree stump near the barn. Then I walked slowly to the barn door and carefully opened it to see if the dogs were okay. As soon as I opened the door, all 3 dogs burst out running happily with their tails wagging. I knelt down and petted them, relieved to see that they were all fine. After they had greeted me, I looked inside the barn from the doorway, and there was no one else. Maybe my mom had locked the dogs in that morning for some reason, or perhaps the wind had blown the barn door shut and they went inside. I didn't worry too much. I picked up my snack and sat on a bale of hay inside the barn. The dogs sat at my feet while I shared small pieces of my sandwich with them. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tall, thin man with long, messy gray hair walking right past the barn entrance. I could hear him making strange babbling sounds. His voice was low and odd, like he was speaking in a language I had never heard before. Oddly, my dogs did not react as they normally would. Instead of barking or running over to investigate, they glanced toward the door where the man had walked by. They wagged their tails a couple of times, almost as if they were curious, but then went back to sitting near me. Normally, when a stranger comes onto our property, my dogs jump up, bark loudly, and rush over. A small bit of fear tugged at my stomach, but not too much, because I was just a kid and my dogs looked happy. I tiptoed to the doorway and peeked around to get a closer look at him. He was very tall and so thin that you could see his ribs and spine sticking out. His hair was messy like a rat's nest, and his beard was just as untidy. Now he was bending over our chicken coop, and I guessed he was searching for eggs. He pulled an egg out and stopped his strange babbling, studying the egg for a long time. Then he whispered something softly to the egg that I couldn't understand. I strained to hear his words, but they were lost in the air. Then, without any warning, he picked up the egg with his hands and put the whole thing into his mouth. I watched in shock as he bit down hard. I noticed that he was missing his front teeth and his mouth was oddly shaped. As he chomped, the yellow yolk began to spill out, slowly running down his chin and neck. I could see him grinding his jaw as he chewed, and the crunch of the hard shell. My stomach twisted and I wanted to vomit or scream, but I was completely frozen in place. When I finally snapped out of my shock, I screamed so loudly that the man turned his head to look at me. He didn't stop what he was doing, he just kept eating. I ran out of the barn as fast as I could, my feet splashing in the wet green grass. I climbed the back wooden steps quickly and rushed into the house. I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me. My heart was pounding hard in my chest and I felt terrified. I was very scared for my dogs and felt guilty for leaving them outside with that man. I pulled the small white curtain away from the window on the door and carefully looked outside to see if my dogs were safe outside. In the middle of our yard, I saw the strange man standing still. He was staring hard at our back door, and to my shock, my dogs were calmly licking small bits of raw egg from his fingertips as if they thought he was a friend, even though the man seemed. Since my dogs were nice and didn't show signs of fear, I felt quite frightened and knew I needed to contact for assistance immediately to avoid a worse situation. I grabbed for the phone. As I hurriedly dialed my mother's work number, I heard the man begin babbling loudly once more. The strange babbling seemed to be getting closer, and I trembled even more, making it difficult for me to speak. When my mother answered in a shaky voice, I managed to say that I needed help and that there was a man on our property. She told me to go upstairs right away, and I slowly climbed the stairs, following her instructions exactly in the hopes that help would arrive soon. At that point, my mom abruptly ended the call and called the police. I heard the man's heavy footsteps as he stomped up the back steps. Once I reached my room, I locked the door just as my mom had told me. I then crawled under the bed, making sure not even one toe peeked out. The space under the bed was dark and cold, and I could barely breathe as I listened to the loud banging on the door. I lay there shaking and quiet, hoping that the noise would stop soon and that I would be safe. I kept thinking about the school holidays coming in a few weeks. I really did not want to be gone. When they arrived, the man walked around the outside of the house. I heard him banging on the windows, making odd, frustrated noises and yelling words that I couldn't understand, probably at me, but he clearly wanted to come inside, and I was waiting for a window to shatter or for him to kick in the back door. When you're scared, time seems to slip away, and I lost track of how long I hid and listened to him, but it didn't feel like long before I heard the police arrive. I could hear the wailing sirens and the sound of their radio coming closer. Soon I heard them talking to the strange man outside. They asked him questions in a firm, clear voice, but he didn't answer them. Instead, his babbling grew louder and sounded more panicked, like he was really scared. Feeling a bit safer now that the police were there, I slowly crept downstairs and carefully moved to the window to look outside. I could see the flashing lights of the police cars and hear the officers' voices in the light. I saw my mother running down the long dirt driveway. She looked very panicked. Her face was pale, and she moved quickly as she burst through the door, clearly desperate to get to me and bring me to safety. My mom wouldn't stop hugging and kissing me while the police asked me questions about what had happened. I felt a bit embarrassed because I was trying to explain everything, and she was so worried that she kept showing her love in front of everyone. Soon after, more police arrived as backup. They took the man with them to the police station, and I remember watching as he was led away in handcuffs. About a week later, the same two police officers returned to our house. They came back to speak with us again and to give my mom an update on the investigation. The police explained that the man on our property had been secretly living in our barn at night and hiding in the woods during the day for a few months. Many people had seen him on the trail during the summer. He was homeless, but he was not usually dangerous. This is why my dogs did not seem afraid of him. They had become friends with him. The police also said that he had health problems and had been in and out of the hospital many times. They explained that the man had started hiding in our barn when the weather began to get colder because he had nowhere else to go. He was a sick man, struggling with his health and trying to survive on his own. Over the years, many people had seen him on the trail during the summer, and my dogs had grown used to him. They saw him as a friend because he treated them kindly. This story does not end with that frightening night. My mother's kindness made a difference, and Jim's story ended peacefully when I attended his funeral 27 years later. At that time, the man we called Jim had finally received the help he needed. With my mother's support and care, he received treatment for his health issues and learned how to take better care of himself. Jim also started taking his medication again and started receiving his disability pension. My mother also helped him find a small place to live in town and even paid the security deposit so he could rent it. Jim then started helping out on our property, volunteering to care for the animals with my mother and me. Later, he earned a few paid hours each week at the vet clinic, where he helped clean and maintain the area. Even though Jim frightened us a lot and had no one in his life, he ended up making a big lasting impact on all of us, especially the animals. Sometimes when you meet someone who seems creepy, you think you'll never want to see someone like that again, but most of the time that feeling is normal. Jim deserved another chance. He wasn't a bad or mean person, he just needed someone to help him get back to a normal life. Jim was a sick man who occasionally had bad episodes, but overall, his final days went fairly well. He made friends in town and received support from his community, and he found a job in a home, and there were always people around to help him. I have told this story many times, but I still get chills when I think about that night so few years ago. My friend and I loved to explore places in Connecticut that people said were haunted. We would drive to old houses, dark forest, and abandoned buildings, even though we never saw any ghost or anything strange. Then one day we decided to visit my hometown. It is a small town where people grow corn. Barns are everywhere in my area. Some barns are new and shiny while others are very old. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other and many people worked in the corn fields when they were young. My father was one of those people who worked on a local farm, and he has many memories from that time. One memory he often shared was about a strange man he saw on the farm. This man used to walk in the rafters of a large barn at the back of the field. The rafters are the wooden beams that hold up the barn's roof, and they creak when someone walks on them. Many workers had seen the same man, but only a few knew who he really was. Then one day my father became curious and asked about him. His face turned pale when he learned that the man was a ghost. Fast forward to a recent ghost tour my friend and I were on, and we set off to find that very barn. Getting into the fields was easy because the owners were family friends and gave us permission. We joked that the drive to the back field felt like a scene from a horror movie. The road was very muddy. Earlier in the week, there were storms with puddles that made every turn seem uncertain as we drove. As we did so, lightning bursts illuminated the pitch-black sky, and a fresh storm gradually moved in to guide us. I pulled out my phone and opened Google Maps. The aerial view showed the whole property, and I could see a small mark where the barn used to be, and I noticed that the barn had long since collapsed and was hidden deep in the forest, which made it very hard to spot from the road despite knowing its true location from the map. I kept this secret from my friend. It wasn't until we got close that we both felt a heavy, strange pressure in our chests. As soon as we drove past it, the feeling quickly faded away. Even though we were both scared, we wanted to see the barn clearly, so we turned around. We parked the car and aimed the headlights into the forest to light up. That heavy feeling returned, and this time it was much stronger. We eventually had to leave because everything felt angry. Just then a shadow appeared in the bushes in front of the barn. It looked like a man, and it stood there watching us. We panicked and rushed to get out of the fields, almost getting stuck in the mud along the way. That feeling of anger and dread stayed with us until we finally left the farm. The drive back home was quiet because the storm had arrived, pouring heavy rain everywhere. When we got home, the first words we said were to my father, "You were right.